This is the GitLab pods public stream. And Josh has the first item on the agenda. Thanks for that, Josh. Take it away.
Thanks, Sid. Just wanted to highlight a couple of the investigation streams just for awareness of what we're kind of working on. I'm working on getting documentation on some high-level strategy, alignment, some iteration strategies, and we'll continue to work on documenting, the kind of the test option, just so we can get that further written down. And then Fabian and Stan are currently working on getting data on cross namespace workflows, so we can have an informed data on that, which will be critical, I think. And then also we'll likely be working on more of the test option as well as we go further through. So brief heads up there. I went through and documented the principles on slide 3 just to provide a set of goals and guardrails as we think through this. These are the ones we discussed last week. I also added one about having a minimally, basically not impacting self-managed too significantly with this work, which will also be important too. From there, I also tried to reflow some of the first few slides just to make the narrative a little more clear and flow a little better. So folks can take a look and let me know if I accomplished that goal or not. And then the next one is I did add a slide on, or more clear slide on why we don't believe we need a shard within a pod. As this does seem to come up from time to time as a question. I added that here. Eric, you have a point on this one.
Yeah, I guess now that I read it, it may have fit better under 4 than 5, but because 4 directly addresses decomposition. So the way I'm thinking of it is that we've got some self-managed customers that are on the managed DB services of the big public clouds, and that database doesn't work for them. So I'm envisioning that the functional decomposition we're doing isn't temporary or isn't just for .com. It's already relevant for large self-managed customers, and that's important. I mean, you could have an exponential amount of CI data compared to your user and issue data. And that doesn't seem like I think those two things are diverging. They're not coming back together. So I think I think we need to do both. I think I would expect them to be sort of forever decisions, and they're both beneficial. I don't think it's one or the other.
So Eric, I think it's worthwhile talking about it, but like, if we look at the size at which being able to run Postgres, it's 10x, at least 10x what we're running into with this specific managed service. Decomposition will buy us 2x. So like, there's a 10x problem, and you get a solution for 20% of it. So I can't argue, like, yes, it will help a little bit, but I think there's a bigger underlying problem. Like, why is that cloud service if it's so slow? And anyway, like a 2x with this customer, like, it's probably not going to buy us enough headroom to even keep them on that. So I think we'll still have to solve the 10x problem with the customer. And the second point is, it depends on how good we make kind of cross namespace workflows, and we don't know yet. They might be hard, but that's the other point.
Steve, do you recall I thought 2x is less than the benefit we were hoping to get from functional decomposition of CI data?
I think that it is. I think that it's more than that. I think we'll have to go back to that. I think one of the things with functional decomposition is that I mean, doing that with the CI data, but is one step, but then kind of also considering decomposition in parallel with some of these other things as we move forward for other data sets, also may get us, 2x in other areas where maybe there are other things not as kind of like low-hanging fruit as the CI data, but
Okay,
where there's
so
other
you
data.
say 4x. I think that the CI data is causing more than a quarter of our writes,
causing around 45%.
45%. So that's 2x. So how do you? I don't follow your calculation, Steve, at all.
Well, I think what I'm suggesting is that the like, and you may be right. I mean, maybe out of the CI data, we're only getting a 2x jump there. I guess what I'm suggesting is with like considering functional decomposition in the future, not only for CI data, but there potentially are other options for us to decompose data out of the database into.
I understand that you can decompose more. So you can decompose in 20 different databases. But if one of those databases has 45% of your writes, then that's your scaling limit. So you're not scaling, you don't keep scaling 2x with everything you do because you have a biggest decomposed thing, you have a biggest function, and that's limiting your scaling. So is that 45%? It's 1 divided by 0.45, which is just over 2x, hence the 2x scaling. I don't see how then you decompose something that's 10% of your writes. It doesn't help you because it's not splitting up that big chunk.
So for background, Steve, Sid's concerned with making the application more complicated than it needs to be, particularly as an open source project. So it's very much about that decision to head down the road of functional decomposition. So we're doing CI. We think that's doing the short term. The question is that something we eventually undo and we go back to a single database? Or is that something where we've got these two types of data in two databases forever? Or would we continue to go down that road as one strategy amongst the others? Or is podding going to cover all the needs and we don't need to bite off that application level complexity?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one path there is to suggest that like podding would cover all of those needs. I guess maybe the concern I would have there is that we would still end up with a customer, potentially even ourselves, where podding isn't sufficient and we still have to do others, and it leads me to say that we kind of need to do all of these things, but maybe there needs to be an optional way of configuring so that we're not placing the burden of our large multi-tenant experience or our huge fleet of single tenant hosted experiences, the burden of configuration onto our customers, and instead giving them the option, for example, if they want to have their CI data just part of the same database and having.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Sid. So functional decomposition was always envisioned as a bridge to shard, meaning in order to reduce the complexity of sharding, which is hard, you take a portion. CI builds was chosen because it is a large chunk of the database, about 45%. So you decompose that, and then we start building shards on that. Then we shard that data, which is only a small portion of the data, and then you start sharding it into those created shards. But functional decomposition was always a bridge. We never wanted to go into the microservices rabbit hole. It was just a way to say, if we take CI, which is a big chunk, it buys us a fair amount of time, we put it on the side, then we shard that, and we only focus on sharding CI, but then we start taking the remainder of the database and turn it into shards or pods. So functionalism was never intended to be the long-term, let's just functionally decompose everything. It was always a bridge to sort of create a boundary around where we started building the sharding capabilities.
Yeah, I understood it as such as well, but that's not what I've seen and observed in how people talk about decomposition. People say, oh, we just decompose more to make it more performant. We split it off more. People are talking about two-phase commits and things like that. It's leading us down this route that contains a lot of the baggage. And even if you make things optional, you still have all that baggage in your code base, and it will slow down the speed with which people can contribute to it.
And maybe there's a distinction, and Jerry, I'd be interested in your thoughts about I agree, like ideally, we decompose part of the data, we shard out that CI data, and then we begin to move, other parts of the data, other tables into that sharded environment. I think, my thought about that is that in practice, it's hard to ever get there, I guess, to the point where you no longer have any sharded data, because along the way, for one reason or another, we're creating data that's unsharded. We're acquiring companies that come in and are not part of that, and so
I
like
agree.
from a
But
practical
given the
standpoint,
constraints,
Yeah.
that was the chosen path because we
Yeah.
didn't want to change the behavior of GitLab.com.
Sorry,
If we go with
what do you mean with we're acquiring companies?
so in the case of like when we would do acquisitions, and let's say we would do an integration of another existing environment or another existing service, it's going to have basically what ends up being a decomposed database of its own that's going to need to be integrated in, potentially integrated into that same sharding strategy, or we'll need a different sharding strategy. I mean, if it's a completely kind of different profile of data.
Every time, Steve, we acquire a company, we have them shut down the product and integrate into our single data store. It's a core part of what we sell. It's a core part of who we are, and it's a core part of our strategy. So we don't seem to be aligned on that.
Yeah, I think if we were able to accomplish that, I think that is great. I think I'm looking forward
But
to.
we're accomplishing that, except for the decomposition.
Yeah.
So we're leaving a very important pattern that has made us very successful behind.
Well, so I have it in the agenda. We can skip ahead to it. I wanted to bring everybody together here because we've got people executing stuff. We've got this potting group, which is developing what's becoming a pretty opinionated strategy. And then we've got a number of people with previous experience at other companies. And it's in 3 different contexts. I think we have to start to get on the same page. And it's not all going to happen in one meeting, but that's why I wanted to add people.
No, I think this is great. This is a conversation we should have, because we're uncovering a ton. We're uncovering that the estimates of decomposition are overrated, that there's assumptions about integrating new products that will not conform to our single data model policy. I think it's super worthwhile.
So like what Steve was just espousing, you had asked for Steve's previous experience at his prior company. He just described his prior experience at that company. That's how they integrated acquisitions. So
I'm much more interested in the pods, what Steve thinks about pods and the feasibility of that, like splitting customer data across multiple databases, so that if one database goes down, not all your customers go down.
Yeah, and
Sid, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I'm pretty close to the team that is working on decomposing the CI tables, and there is no work going on that is not focused on CI or on other parts of the application. And to the best of my knowledge, we have not made any decision following that. We're working on this because that's, as Jerry said, like a large chunk of the database, and it is envisioned as the iterative step forward to allow us to scale GitLab.com. Given the size constraints that we have, but that's it. There's nothing, to my knowledge, of decomposing other tables right now. It's solely focused on CI.
I agree, but there's already people talking about it. And at the same time, I've seen proposals that make pods harder in the future, like normalizing tables that would make podding them, splitting them up between customers harder. So I'm not saying stop any work that's currently in progress. Say, hey, this is a really important subject to get aligned on, and there seems to be a lot of space between different people, including like about our company strategy and the perceived benefits of decomposition, of future decomposition.
So that's one of the big questions, Fabian. Do you mind going and getting an estimate from the team working on it, what the expected headroom is? It seems like Sid's feeling it's 2x. We've heard 5 or 10x. Let's develop like a
I can certainly do that. I think, I don't know, but I think one of the bits of confusion is, our database is not at 100% right now. So, I think sometimes there's a difference between the net benefit that decomposition brings to the overall capacity of scaling in the database system. And those are two different things.
The
and so we have to be careful.
Having is that people say 10x headroom, which is like the headroom increases by 10x, which
Correct.
is only 2x scaling. And
Yes.
what we've been saying, what the goal of this project, as agreed with you, Eric, is to scale to 10 million users. That's not 10x headroom, that's 10x scaling. Decomposition will not bring that by itself. Now, there's an argument, decomposition will allow sharding, and sharding will allow the scaling. And I think we should have, I don't disagree that sharding is in our future. I want to shard via pod strategy. There's other ways of sharding. Maybe there's, I'm using the wrong word, but like how to shard is the question. Do we do that via pods or via table shards? That is the big question we have to answer. And it's not necessary. Like decomposition might help, but it's not necessary. And if you know you're going to shard in a different way, in a pods way, it makes everything more complicated. Code base wise.
So to answer your question, all I need to know is that it's okay for somebody in one pod not to see stuff on the other pod.
That's great.
If I get that, then pods, based on the work that I've done in the past, is the way to go. But that was not an option.
Well, great. Fabian did an analysis. Let's go into that. What's the preliminary stat of that?
Yes, so I've done a bit of work that is very much enabled by preliminary work from Andreas and database group and with Stan's help. We did this today, so we have to really check these things. But essentially what we're looking at right now is understanding how users interact with different top-level namespaces. And the interaction right now can be essentially anything. So it's not a specific workflow. We are not at that level of granularity. But what we found is that 97% of all users interact with only one top-level namespace. And then if you stratify this and you look at users that have access to paid namespaces, so on a gold plan or a silver plan, 97% of users interact with 2 or fewer top-level namespaces. I think that pattern is explained by us not extracting personal namespaces. They count into this as well. So we'll have to do that work. But the indication right now is that cross namespace queries or usage of that is quite uncommon. So not very many users do this.
So let me draw that out for everyone in the call. 97% of all users use only one namespace. That means that 3% of our users need to be in the same pod. That means we can scale 33x. That means we have 30,000% headroom.
I want to call out some limitations here, just because this is really preliminary. First, this is across all users in the system. So that's not the active users. So that I think can skew the pattern. We have to extract that. We haven't been able to separate out personal namespaces yet. And I think it's also important to note that it's difficult for us to say, it's like, why don't users do this? Right? And I think the easy assumption is to say, well, they don't benefit from these features. And I think that is maybe true for customers who pay us, right? Enterprise customers. But I think we need to keep in mind that maybe there are some strategically important workflows, such as, like forking in open source projects that we want to maintain.
I totally agree. So let's assume that it's 10% of the users that need to be on the same pods. That's 10x headroom. And all the while we're working on the 2x headroom thing that is decomposition. So I want us to not stop any work that's in progress, but this is the big thing I want more people to be aware of. Pods can be a 10xer, and the 2xer will lead us down a different path.
Another comment that I would like to make here is that I think there's some more room in analyzing this and looking at specific workflows. I think there's also, I would like to talk to a few customers and understand how they perceive this. I've heard anecdotal talk from technical account managers for specific segments where people really don't want any interaction. We know that is a use case where people want to be more isolated. And so I think we have to be mindful what we disrupt, but it may be a case that in some instances the trade-offs are also worth for our customers, because they say, hey, I have more isolation, I have less blast radius, I'm not so interested in some of these workflows, and that may be acceptable. I think this is the preliminary data here.
Fabian, could you
And,
also run a report like the 3% of users that use more than one namespace? What percentage of all namespaces are they across? That would validate the kind of like, hey, we could put them all in one pod sort of thing. The other extreme would be if 3% of users are somehow spread across 100% of the remaining projects, then there is no one pod we could put them on. I'm just curious where on that spectrum we would land.
Okay, I'll look at that. This is a little bit difficult to obtain in terms of the data. I think without Stan, it wouldn't be possible, but I'll try to tease it out.
I'm very impressed that you have produced this data since the last meeting, and it's super helpful, Fabian. Thank you, and thanks, Stan. And Andreas.
Yeah, that's all I have for now. I wish I had more, but
No, this is super
that's
helpful.
kind of the gist.
It's the best case, and so 33x is best case, but at least there's a 2x in there, and probably there's a 10x in there.
I think in addition, even people who do use it, right, the question is how valuable is it? So if you've linked something, a comment or an issue or something like that, right? Like how important is it that the merged closed status shows up? You know, a lot of these workflows could be relatively low value, and if we disrupt them, might not alter people's overall user experience significantly, if at all. So
yeah, but we don't even need to go there. Like as long as we can put 90% of the new users in a new pod, like we don't even have to migrate anybody. As long as the new users can go into a new 90% of them can go into a new pod, we're good.
Yep. No, I just commenting further on. Yeah,
I think Jerry is
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I think Jerry is right in the sense that if we as a product are okay with making some of these queries no longer accessible or a little bit harder, I think that can drive the technical implementation. And I think that's the way I'm trying to think about it.
Cool. I have a bunch of stuff up here. Those are all slide updates. I think if they're on the call, we can maybe go to 9. Eric, or did we cover that one already?
Yeah, I kind of already voiced this over. Just everybody can contribute. So I invited myself to this meeting and brought some of the folks I wanted us to coordinate with. And Steve yesterday wrote up his prior experience that had asked for it, and Jerry had previously written up his exposure to a variety of different flavors of scaling and way to do pods and stuff like that.
One thing I didn't put in there, but I'll add into the doc is, in general, I'm just going to state that I think that there's hurdles that that we'll hit or whatever, things that will come around where there's a flavor of kind of all of these things that we'll need to do to meet different situations, and that's the experience that I have is that podding does a lot and is a huge thing, but still ran into practically situations where an entire pod, an entire dedicated database to a single prospect or account wasn't enough, and so other things needed to be done as far as decomposition into other data sources or more sharding of specific data. And so but that's not the problem that is necessarily facing us right now. It might be one down the road. One thing with podding, though, I say that in the last experience was one of the most valuable things that we did over many, many years was the fact that by dedicating a pod to our own use, and just like here at GitLab, we were kind of our own biggest customer, and putting that at the front of the production deployment chain, we found so many problems that never made it to the other pods that our customers were on. And so there's a huge benefit potentially for us in a different area here out of podding. So.
That's a great point. Let's add that to the slide deck. We're at time. Thanks, Eric, Steve, and Jarir for joining. I think the meeting was much better because of it. Thanks, everyone.